Okay, amazing. Good afternoon and welcome to the Year 12 STEM Curriculum Review Workshop. My name is Jen Starr and I'm the Deputy Director of the Asia Education Foundation, and I will be your MC today. I'd like to give a warm welcome to our special guests who are joining us today. Miriam Camaso, the Program Manager, Education and Leadership at the Australian High Commission, PNG. Mr. Benny Rayapan, Director, Secondary Education Management and Coordination at the National Department of Education in PNG. Dr. Clement Waine, who's the Curriculum Writing Team Lead. Associate Professor Michelle Lasson and the 5 subject specialists joining us from the Australian Council for Educational Research. And of course, our wonderful curriculum writers from Papua New Guinea. Before going further, I would just like to pause and acknowledge that I'm coming to you today from Brisbane, which are the traditional lands of the Yugara and Turrbal peoples of the Meanjin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and future. I know we're coming from many different places and traditional lands, so I encourage you to do the same. Before moving on, I would like to ask Martha Marusi to say an opening prayer.
Thank you. Thank you, Jen, and welcome aboard, everybody. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for the gift of life today. Just to open our eyes and know that we are alive. Thank you. We thank you for this meeting. We thank you for everybody who has put their effort together to put our curriculum. Father, I pray that you bless them. Take us through today, O God, and give us an open mind and understanding. We pray for your peace throughout this discussion. This is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you, Jen. It's back to you. Thank you, Martha.
This workshop is part of the overarching PNG Australia Secondary Schools Partnership Initiative, funded by DFAT and implemented by Australia Awards PNG and the Asia Education Foundation at Asialink, the University of Melbourne. I'm not going to read out everybody's names because there are a number of us here, but I'd just like to acknowledge the AEF and AAPNG staff in the various Zoom rooms today. Next slide, please, Sophie. There are 3 main components to our curriculum review today. We'll first have a comparative curriculum review, which looks at the STEM curriculum as a whole, and we'll then break into smaller subject groups for more subject-specific reviews before having the opportunity for questions and discussion at the end. So I know there will be a lot to discuss, and if you could hold your questions until we have that opportunity. I would now like to introduce Miriam Camaso, Program Manager, Education and Leadership at the Australian High Commission, PNG, to give the opening remarks.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon and hope you are all well. Firstly, on behalf of the Australian High Commission, I would like to acknowledge our PNG STEM curriculum writers in the room, our National Department of Education staff, and our team from Australia Awards and AEF, and the ACER team that are presenting today. I am pleased to join you all virtually for the Year 12 STEM Curriculum Review Workshop. And it is great to meet you all again after the first workshop last year. And I hope that from the first workshop, there were some interesting interactions between the ACER team and our department staff, including the past team over the last months. It's interesting to hear and see the ACER feedback today. And I also, with my supervisor here, is interested in also hearing about the feedback from our NDOE counterparts here in country. And from the past team and the Australian High Commission, we will continue to provide the STEM technical support where relevant to support the Department of Education in PNG. As you all know, PNGAus Partnership Secondary Schools initiative was designed to support STEM education and build a partnership between PNG and Australian schools. This is in collaboration with our National Department of Education in PNG. And we partnered 12 PNG and 12 Australian schools since 2019, and STEM was the key focus of our educational capabilities, strengthening the school's relationships and all this through the relationships. We look back to what PASS has offered to our NDOE and the PNG schools. We have come a long way, and we congratulate everyone that's put an effort into making sure that STEM support has been given to our PNG counterparts. The first support that we gave was, we had a head of CSIRO education as guest speaker at the first CEO, the Senior Education Officers Conference for our department in July 2019 to engage with our key NDOE staff. And this was a very good outcome for us as a team, but also for our government counterpart in PNG. We also focused on STEM study tour. One of the support that we provided so far was getting our NDOE staff and teachers to travel to Australia in 2019 to see firsthand what STEM education looks like and to bring that experience back to PNG and see how it fits into the overall STEM curriculum that they're planning to create. We also, through PASS, have the face-to-face, online, and blended professional learning, which has a heavy focus on STEM as well, to encourage the teachers on the best practice on how to have teach STEM in their classroom. So we congratulate the team. We recognize the effort that you have put into that as well. And the recent support was from last year when we engaged heavily with the department on reviewing the STEM curriculum, which we want to acknowledge ACER for coming on board and doing that for our team. In addition, DFET also provided graduate certificate in STEM short course through the Australia Awards. This was a success as well. There are 48 participants so far that have graduated with that STEM certificate, and we believe that they are an asset for the Department of Education to utilize in future wherever they are. And 3 of our past schools were fortunate to be selected through that merit process, and they went through their training. So it was Ayura, Gomini, and Andy Tale that had teachers in that program. We also were happy to see 2 NDOE officers who went through the graduate short program as well. So for us, the core focus is investing in quality education system and the people-to-people links. And we are grateful that we have managed to do this through the partnership with NDOE since 2019. So for us going forward, we will continue to support the STEM training for teachers and students through PASS. And we hope that using this STEM workshop, teachers will be able to focus on better ways of teaching STEM and making it more innovative, creative, and fun for the students. So we hope the workshop today by ACER supports the department further in developing the STEM curriculum. And for us, as I close, Australia still remains committed in supporting PNG's education priorities through the PNGAus Partnership. With that, you all have a wonderful afternoon, and I hope you enjoy the workshop. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. We will now turn to the reason that we are all here, the curriculum review. We will start with an overarching review that looks at the Year 12 STEM curriculum as a whole, before we break into the smaller groups for our subject-specific reviews. We'll have the opportunities to discuss and review and ask questions of the reviewers post-presentation. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Associate Professor Michelle Lasson, who is the project lead at the Australian Council for Educational Research, to provide an overview of the whole curriculum feedback. Over to you, Michelle.
Thank you very much, Jen. Nicole's just going to call up my slides. And we'll go to the next slide. Thanks, Nicole. Well, thank you. We welcome this opportunity to work with you all on the development of the STEM curriculum. As a team, we have collective experience across a number of international curriculum development and review projects, and our team is listed there on the slide. Because of our experience, we certainly appreciate the nature of curriculum development. We have all worked towards very tight deadlines, and we know that every new version of a curriculum is more complete and coherent than the former. So we would like to heartily congratulate you on all of your work to date. It has been a pleasure to review the Grade 12 curriculum, and we look forward to working with you through each of the phases of this project over the course of the year. Thank you, Nicole. Let's first look at the focus for each of these phases. For our next deliverable, Deliverable 2, we turn our attention to the Grade 11 curricula, largely terms 3 and 4, given that last year the ACER team reviewed term 2. And in the context of that review, the transition from Grade 11 term 1, which is your bridging course, to Grade 11 term 2. Moving on to Deliverable 3, which has a dedicated assessment focus. For this deliverable, we'll review formative assessment opportunities and summative assessment tasks across grades 11 and 12. And then for the final deliverable, Deliverable 4, we'll review the full senior curriculum for each of the 6 STEM subjects, and we'll also take into consideration the feedback that will have been provided by classroom teachers who have piloted the new curriculum. Slide, Nicole. So in advance of this workshop, it is most likely that you've received the comparative report, which provides a review across the 6 subjects, and the individual subject reviews that are compiled as slideshows to support the breakout sessions. Don't worry if you haven't received some of these documents. I'm sure Jen and the team can get those materials to you after this workshop. Slide, thank you. So as you're aware, the comparative report focuses on review of the syllabi documents alone, whereas at the individual subject level, the ACER discipline experts reviewed the full suite of materials: the teacher guide, the TG, the teacher resource book, the TRB, and the student resource book, the SRB. Here is a table wherein we documented the materials that were made available to us for our Grade 12 review. It can be seen that Module 1 is the only module that has been fully developed for the majority of subjects, and that determined our focus for the individual subject reviews. Slide, thank you. Now to some of the key findings of the comparative review. I'll focus on those that we know from evidence will have the most impact on how students and teachers engage with the new curriculum. The organisation of the report should be immediately recognisable to you as curriculum writers. It aligns with the various levels of the curriculum structure. So that is the thema, the module, and the topic. Slide, thanks, Nicole. First, a feedback regarding the overarching framing. Next slide. We'd like to recognise that the organisation of the subject curricula, at least for 4 of the 6 subjects, this is the case, into globally relevant and futures-focused themes is innovative. From the perspective of students, real-world relevance is likely to impact positively on student engagement in the learning. From the perspective of teachers, this alignment with cross-cutting themes across STEM subjects would provide opportunity for planning some integrated teaching, learning, and assessment experiences. Secondly, we pick up on a recommendation in the comparative report, and one that was made last year when reviewing the grade 11 curriculum. That is the recommendation to publish clear scoping and sequencing documents for each of the 6 subjects, showing the progression from grades 11 and 12 of the learning outcomes and conceptual themes or core ideas, and skills development and development of broader capabilities. The scoping and sequencing would certainly support teachers' planning and understanding of the curriculum. And so too, if that was developed at this stage for you as curriculum developers, it would provide you with a view of the entire landscape to support your review, to scrutinise the flow of the learning and also the respective emphases to determine if there's opportunity for students to develop not just content knowledge, but deeper understandings and disciplinary specific skills and broader capabilities. This balance is tricky, and we acknowledge that. There is a tendency for us all as curriculum developers to crowd curriculum and privilege content coverage. Our individual subject reviewers will speak to that theme in the breakout sessions. So next slide, thank you, Nicole. Assessment, and again. So one of the clear findings from the comparative review and a simple mapping activity is that the assessment schedule across the entire STEM suite, and you've got all 6 subjects there as column headings and assessment types as row headings. What we see is a relatively traditional assessment regime with an emphasis on tests, quizzes, and laboratory and other practical tasks. Slide. In fact, 60% of the assessments comprise tests and quizzes. We see some diversity, research and other assignments, case studies. Notably, there is only one oral assessment task in the schedule, and that is the presentation. We recommend that you disrupt this balance to incorporate a more diverse and authentic range of tasks. Importantly, though, the quality of the tests and the quizzes will need to be scrutinised. There is a need to avoid requiring students to memorise and reproduce large volumes of factual and procedural knowledge in those tests and quizzes. Next slide. As we know, assessment is the focus of deliverable 3, and we look forward to having input into that area of your curriculum. However, a clear recommendation at this stage as you continue to develop the curriculum is to review assessment schedules in terms of the extent to which the emphasis is on developing and assessing students' deeper conceptual understanding, higher order thinking, and disciplinary specific skills and transferable capabilities. And that certainly would be in line with the overall aim of PNG's STEM curriculum, which is for students to become creators, innovators, and inventors of knowledge. One concrete suggestion made in the comparative review in terms of assessment is to consider the design and implementation of an authentic integrated capstone project as part of the grade 12 student experience. We ask that you consider the design and implementation of an authentic project where students select and investigate a local or global challenge through an interdisciplinary approach. Next slide. And finally, findings from the comparative review regarding curriculum elements. As the report highlights, there is variability in the way that curriculum elements are interpreted and articulated across and within subjects. Lack of clarity regarding the purpose and nature of all curriculum elements means that there is some unnecessary duplication in the syllabi. A worthwhile exercise that we recommend for the whole writing team would be to workshop every curriculum element to clarify its purpose, ensuring all elements add unique value to the overall articulation, identify the most appropriate name for the element, standardise the approach to framing of the element, and review alignment with other elements to maximise student engagement and learning. Next slide, thank you. In the comparative report, we've included a table as Appendix A, showing how different elements at the various levels are framed for each of the STEM subjects. Next slide. In terms of the curriculum elements that make up the PNG STEM curriculum, you have content standards, or a content standard and benchmarks for each module, and performance indicators, proficiency skills, and values and attitudes for each topic. Slide. The content standard typically presents as a single module learning objective, which broadly synthesizes the knowledge and understanding and skills that are targeted in the performance indicators across the topics in the module. Next slide. The greatest variability in interpretation of curriculum elements are those in the blue frame. The content benchmarks, the proficiency skills, and the traits of values. Let's go through each of these elements, starting with those at the topic level, the proficiency skills and the values and attitudes, and winding our way back to the benchmarks. Next slide. So the proficiency skills. This element presents in some of the STEM subjects as a single or set of learning outcomes. As such, there's duplication with other curriculum elements, such as the performance indicators. However, for those subjects on screen, chemistry and technology and biology, you can see articulation of a set of largely transferable skills and capabilities with some discipline specificity. So for chemistry, analytical problem solving, research skills, numerical skills, written and oral communication skills, observation skills, planning skills, teamwork and interpersonal skills. Technology, as identified on the screen, and biology. Next slide. I just want to hone in on biology here and the reference to research skills and investigative skills. If we benchmarked with biology curriculum internationally or science curriculum internationally, what we are likely to see is a detailed outline of science inquiry skills as a component of the curriculum articulation. So for proficiency skills, perhaps as a team, you may wish to consider a more detailed articulation of the skills required to work successfully within the subject area. Skills that are both really specific to the discipline and those wider transferable skills that are necessary to work successfully within the discipline. Next slide. Values and attitudes now, if we move to those. This is an emphasis that is becoming increasingly important in curricula internationally. Values and attitudes are difficult to assess, but they're important. Sometimes in some curricula, they're referred to as dispositions or personal capabilities. Given the global context that we live in today, there is emphasis on dispositions for our students to be lifelong learners, to be reflective, to be resilient, to be adaptive, to remain calm under pressure. Again, there is a lot of variability in how this element is interpreted across subjects in your PNG STEM curriculum. Here are examples from chemistry and technology, where there is an articulation of dispositions, such as determination, flexibility, curiosity. I like this one, being comfortable with failure and ability to learn from failures. However, in other subjects, again, the focus is on articulating conceptual understanding and to a lesser extent, application of knowledge and skills. So again, you have duplication of elements, just worded in a different way, sometimes commencing with appreciate. So the next slide. So if we go back to the module or the content benchmarks, these present as a single or a set of learning outcomes or a list. Now the list, and here's an example, but I could have provided many examples, so I'm not identifying any particular curriculum writer here. But you can see it's a list here of core themes or kind of learning outcomes or applications like hydrogen as an energy carrier, constructing a hydrogen fuel cell. Now, the reason why curriculum writers are actually articulating this element as lists is because of the STEM or the starter, students' ability to master the knowledge and skills of. And what I'm suggesting is that by changing that starter alone, it will help your writing team to articulate benchmarks more robustly. So in your starter, avoid reference to knowledge and skills and mastery. Mastery actually has connotations of mastery learning, which is a particular pedagogical approach. You have identified problem-based learning as your overarching pedagogical approach. So we're suggesting a simple starter such as students will be able to, and that will support your team articulating much clearer benchmarks. Slide, thank you. We'll certainly invest here as a team, supporting you to articulate those content benchmarks, particularly when we focus in on deliverable 3 assessment and summative assessment. Next slide. And slide again. But at this stage, I just wanted to end the presentation and leave you with some simple frameworks that will support you framing elements such as your topic performance indicators or your learning outcomes and benchmarks in the meantime. So staying on this slide, SMART is an acronym that identifies key considerations for framing intent. So specific, what action will students perform? Measurable, how will success be measured? Achievable, is it challenging but attainable for students? Relevant, does it focus on what's important and align with other elements of the curriculum? And time-bound, of course, there's a duration to consider, and the starter might be by the end of this module, students will be able to, or by the end of this topic, students will be able to. Next slide, thank you. So if we focus on specific and measurable, avoid words like know, understand, appreciate, be familiar with. Instead ask, through what actions will students demonstrate that they know, understand, appreciate? Identifying that action verb is crucial. The verb is actually going to be the bridge to the design of the assessment tasks or items. I might just pause there. Nicole, I see movement in room 1. Should I be concerned? No, all good? Okay, and next slide, thank you. So another simple framework that you would be familiar with as curriculum writers, of course, is Bloom's. Bloom and colleagues' taxonomy of educational objectives for the cognitive domain. And what we want, you'll see in the comparative report, I've identified where there is an over-reliance on learning outcomes or performance indicators that start with define, list, describe, or explain is one that is typically used. We want to shift from reliance on those lower order thinking skills to developing higher order critical and creative thinking skills, such as identified in red there, analyse, integrate and evaluate. Next slide. Let's take a minute now to deconstruct a learning outcome. It's really important to understand the format of a learning outcome. And I thought I would just use colour coding as the simplest and quickest way to communicate the format. So as you would know as curriculum writers, when we write a learning outcome, we're going to identify that sharp action verb in blue, calculate, classify, create. In black text then, is the content that the action verb acts on. So calculate what? In the first outcome, the gradient from maps. Classify what? The second outcome, the change of states of matter. Create what in the third outcome? A plan to investigate identified hypotheses. And finally, in brown text then, qualifying expectations and conditions. So again, let's go through those 3 learning outcomes. Calculate, well, in meters, kilometres, percentages, ratio. Classify, when given a description of shape and volume. Create, how? Using a graphic organiser. On to the next slide then. And again, a simple frame that will help you to identify how you may qualify. So the action verb acts on content, but then how are you going to provide that additional detail around expectations and conditions? You might identify the context, what frameworks students have to refer to. What is given, what is not given, by checking a chart without supervision as examples. How often? At least once per hour at the start of every cycle. How well? No more than 1 error or accurate to 3 decimal points in mathematics. Or what are the variables, irrespective of the patient's behaviour? I see the unit on medical diagnoses there. So the next slide. So as I said, all of these findings and recommendations are actually identified in the comparative report. If you have not received that report, I know that Jen and the team will pass that report on to you. Again, I would like to reiterate before we move into the breakout sessions, we truly commend you for the effort that you have invested in developing now the grade 11 and grade 12 draft curriculum. We're very excited around the framing around those futures focused themes. And just with some really clear targeted intervention at this point, we think you can shape this curriculum to the next iteration. We very much look forward to walking this journey with you, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for that clear and comprehensive feedback, and also your patience with the tech challenges that we are facing. So very much appreciated. We're now going to move into 2 breakout rooms. Am I correct, Aaron?
Correct. We're sending room 1 back to room 1 as we speak.
Okay, excellent. So in room 1, we have biology, chemistry, and technology. These presentations will be led by Dr. Celia McNeely, Dr. Zachary Watts, and Mr. Anton Davies. And in room 2, we have maths, physics, and engineering, led by Dr. Christy Osborne and Mr. Philip McKinnon. Each subject specialist will have 5 minutes to present their review, followed by questions and then discussion. I'll be moderating in room 1, and I'll be supported by Sophie Howlett, and Michelle will be moderating in room 2. You don't have to do anything to get to your breakout room. You'll automatically be taken there, but if you have any problems, just come back to the main room and we will reassign you. So if our friends in PNG we'll give our friends in PNG a few minutes to move to their rooms. And Nicole, if you could please do your magic and send us to our breakout rooms. Thank you. All right, room 1 in PNG, how are we going? Is everybody there? Thumbs up if you can hear us.
We're good.
Excellent. Okay. As I mentioned earlier to our subject specialists, we have 3 incredible people with us today who'll be giving our presentations. So Celia McNeely, who'll be doing biology, she'll be going first. Zachary Watts, who'll be doing a presentation on the chemistry curriculum. And then Anton Davies will be the last one, and he'll be doing technology. We'll do all 3 presentations first of about 5 to 8 minutes, and then we'll have some time as a group to discuss at the end. So if you have burning questions, please write them down and we'll save it to after we finish. Can everyone see the presentation? Thumbs up. Okay, great. All right, I'm going to hand over to Celia now to give her presentation.
Thank you, Jen. And it's really lovely to see everyone again. Thank you for taking the time for this workshop. I would just like to start by congratulating you on a very thorough and ambitious and progressive biology curriculum. It was quite incredible to see the modules and the topics of learning that have been incorporated into the biology unit. So congratulations. Some of the really positive aspects that I very much enjoyed was the application of local contexts. There are opportunities in there for example, that refer specifically to healthcare in Papua New Guinea, energy and renewable energies in Papua New Guinea. And I think it's, as Michelle has said, it's extremely important that students have relevant and real world contexts through which to learn these knowledges and skills. It's also really incredible the inquiry learning that is incorporated from dissections and medical scenarios through to construction of batteries, and lots of these hands-on skills that are really great opportunities for students to develop their skills and apply their knowledge. Can we flick to the first slide, please? Thanks. So as I've said, there are excellent learning opportunities, and the local context is incredibly important. I think in the overall syllabus was just a suggestion to reconsider the sequence of modules to essentially combine the elements for more of the anatomical and physiological aspects of the syllabus, and then move into some of the other topics more relating to biofuels and energy and biobatteries. That was an overall observation of the syllabus, that the structure might benefit by that flow because of the learning progression opportunities for students, and a couple of minor editing observations that, for example, benchmarks for robotics need to be established, but we acknowledge that this curriculum is a work in progress, and I'm sure they are evolving. Next slide, please. So with respect to the module 1, we reviewed the teacher guide, the teacher resource book, and the student resource book. And I think, just to reiterate, probably the most significant observation, which is something that Michelle talked about in her presentation as well, is the use of cognitive verbs for the performance indicators. So next slide, please, Jen. There are several performance indicators that either refer to affective verbs or perhaps what we would consider lower order cognitive skills, such as appreciate being an affective verb, or define or explain in the lower order thinking skills. The performance indicators would really benefit from having an explicit connection to the skills or the analytical processes that we're expecting students to be able to apply through these learnings. So we want to make sure that we're providing opportunities for students to develop and use their knowledge, extend a reasoned extension of knowledge, but we also need to use the performance indicators to demonstrate to teachers what our expectations are of the students. So clarity on the performance indicators will benefit both the student cohort and the teachers who are working in this STEM curriculum. Now, look, I'm aware that we don't really have much time. So rather than reading through all of these notes, which I know you have access to, I think the only other opportunity for revision was within topic 4. Topic 4 is essentially the application of what students have learnt in the theme of bioinformatics to this point. It's an excellent practical unit that requires students to obtain DNA samples, do the extractions and go through the process of identifying gene sequences and doing a genomic analysis through sequencing and blast analysis, which is an excellent task that the students will, I'm sure, very much enjoy. I very much liked the idea of collaborating with a university for this task. It's something where the facilities may be more accessible there, but it also demonstrates to students career opportunities and introduces them to people who are working in this space. The only concern with topic 4 was whether there was sufficient time, and to consider perhaps whether the tasks involved in that practical activity in topic 4 would could be broken into smaller tasks that can be embedded within each of the units. So where, for example, the students are learning about DNA extraction to do the first part of the practical activity there. And this will also then avoid the downtime that's associated with some of these processes. So waiting for sequencing results to come back, waiting for DNA extractions or PCRs to be complete. So that was just an opportunity that we thought may benefit from being reconsidered to be smaller components of the other topics within that module. Jen, I think I'll probably leave it there. As I say, the rest of the notes are available. They were the 2 probably key recommendations from our review of the curriculum, and I'm aware that Anton and Zach are keen to discuss their modules as well. So is it okay if I leave it there?
Thanks, Celia. A great presentation regardless of the time, and we'll come back and have a chat about it once Zach and Anton have had an opportunity to speak. So Zach, you're up next. Are you ready to go?
I'm ready to go as soon as you're ready to go.
There you go. All right. Chemistry is up. Over to you.
All right, well, maybe let's move to the next slide. So I was quite interested to read through this. I found the material feels very modern. I think one flaw that I've seen in other curriculum is that it's similar to what I learned, and there's been such progression in science and chemistry that the subject matter that I learned, if you taught it to kids these days, it might seem a bit dry and pointless, but these felt real. When I worked in a lab, these were techniques that I used. I found them to be really authentic to modern science. Watching Celia, I see that there's been a lot of there are threads that go through each of the topics, the science domains. So let's flick to the next slide. Maybe the next slide. So I guess there's a balancing act between the quantity of information that we're telling people, the students, that they need to learn, and can they actually get through that material in the time allocated. We didn't have quite that, we didn't have that data about how long students were spending on this. I think everyone was assuming around 5 hours per week. From our discussions, I got the impression that a lot of people thought that might be a challenge to get through all the material. So I felt in some places, focusing on the concept rather than the kind of more technical details could kind of shift the balance a bit more. Look at the material in a kind of a bigger picture that kind of captures the kind of general idea rather than getting into the nitty-gritty, the detail in all cases. So, for example, the protein purification, that is a great practical skill-based topic. I felt there was a bit of a mix of the language used. For me as an expert, I found it quite easy to read, but I question whether students would have a good understanding on their first read through. So while there's I'm not talking to the correct slide. Sorry, I've just realized this. There's a real, every now and again, there is technical language that I felt was quite out of place. It's not that these students couldn't understand this, it's just that it's thrown down for them to understand in context. And I think that's a really difficult way of going about it. The sequencing, Celia made a suggestion to the sequencing, and I realized there's parallels between their biology and their chemistry. So there's that sequencing of the big picture, like the biotechnology. I would imagine we want to do the biotechnology in both at the same time. At a more finer grain point, there was some, particularly in the biotechnology topic, the detail about amino acids and proteins was covered last. And I think that contained a lot of fundamental knowledge that if they know this first, it makes it easier to learn the more complicated material. So there's a mix of language and concepts that I think are a bit back to front. So considering what's the priority for learning first, and for me, I think it's the basics about amino acids and proteins. So swapping those two over, I think, would help the flow. Certainly, there's a lot of space for higher order thinking based problem solving here. So I think there need to be a kind of a change from, I guess the question we want to ask is, what does a higher order thinking task look like? And that's maybe something we can talk about at the end. But I think a lot of the questions being put to students is quite knowledge-based. So that's something to focus on too. I think from all of us at ACER, being able to kind of exercise the knowledge that you've learnt is important to kind of retain that information. We're not just learning kind of pieces of nuggets of information. We're learning how to understand them all together and decide what pieces of information are most important for the tasks that I'm doing at the moment. Can we swap to maybe the next slide? So I've covered some of this. So rearranging the sequence to maximize the I feel like there would be repetition you would be explaining things that you would later be explaining again. So in terms of streamlining our curriculum, I think that's an example where we can really help students by structuring the curriculum in a more logical way. We don't always need to use the most technical language. Students don't need to necessarily have the correct language as long as they can understand the concepts. So explaining it to them with a more simple language can be a way to kind of condense down the volume of information we're trying to convey. Obviously, there's a balance. Some language, we want them to learn this language as they go through, but if they don't understand it as they're reading it, that is a real hurdle for understanding. So can you understand it in context without having to go look up further information or ask someone for information about this?
Now, yeah, sorry. I'm just going to jump in here, Zach, and say you've got 2 minutes left.
Okay.
Otherwise, we're going to run out of time for answers.
No,
so maybe the two big things that you can't say without, and let me know which slide I need to go.
I don't have that slide in front of me. Can you sort of flick to the next slide?
Yeah.
Okay. So incorporating more interpretation of results into as regular tasks, so day-to-day activities, not necessarily as part of the big experiment. So how can we include some analytical skills at each step as we move through the curriculum? So kind of where can we put this into the curriculum? I think there's also a lot of space for problem solving, giving students unfamiliar problems and asking them to use what knowledge they have to solve that problem. As I said before, it's kind of a good way to kind of exercise our knowledge. So there's certainly lots of different, I've got the enzyme purification in front of me. There are many, many ways to do this and to do protein purification. But a lot of that is transferable, okay, from one technique to another. We don't necessarily need to learn the whole thing over and over and over again. But also, what does this look like in the lab and what questions can we ask about it? So I think this is a more real problems, I guess, is where I think we could emphasize the problem solving as we move through this curriculum. I think I'm probably out of time.
That's right. We'll move to Anton, and we'll give him his 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and we can perhaps elaborate on a little bit of these. We've added an extra 5 minutes to this activity because of the challenges. But thank you, Zach. Really comprehensive, and I can tell you're very passionate about your subject. So Anton, I will move across the next slide for you. And technology, let me know when you'd like me to click the slide. Over to you.
Okay, thanks, Jen. Good day, everyone. It's nice to see real people out there in the real world again. Could you please raise your hands? Who is in technology? Who of you are in? Okay, great. So my name's Anton. I'm from Africa. I'm actually a medical specialist with other degrees in various subjects, including technology. I'll just go through all the slides quickly and discuss some quite drastic changes that I've suggested. I really apologize for that, but I thought about it really hard. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so this curriculum is for grade 12. It follows the grade 11 curriculum very nicely with JavaScript. I found the resources, that's on the next slide, but I'll just quickly speak about it. The resources are really nice and comprehensive and quite brief, and a really excellent set of materials. Congratulations to whoever set that up. I would really have liked to have had that when I was in school. Now, the languages themselves, there are 5 languages discussed initially, but they're all quite similar to each other, and they're all developed at a syntactic level mainly, so that's fairly superficial. 2 of them are interpreted languages, JavaScript and Python. Java, C, and C++ are very similar compiled languages, which means they would run very much faster. Now, I think this is way too much material to cover, and they're all too similar to each other, which would get very, very confusing by the time you get to the 5th language. There's also MATLAB and Lisp later on in robotics. MATLAB is similar again, but Lisp is very different. So, yeah. Which of these, if you had to choose 2 of these, which of these would you choose to present in a curriculum without losing anything significant? So I suggested JavaScript mainly for web development and presentation, and also Python for numerical work and general purpose computing. Python has the advantage that one can quickly get into the file system and save results or read results from day to day. So I would suggest just keeping 2 of these languages for different purposes, for present and future employability, and then also the future of computing in general with web distributed computing for JavaScript at the moment. I also considered several other languages as substitutes, but I think JavaScript and Python will work together really well. JavaScript also follows the HTML and CSS that is done in the last modules in year 11. Okay, now artificial intelligence and robotics are really good solid topics for the moment and for the future, and they will serve to engage the students really well and keep them talking and hopefully keep them in the business of technology in the future. I wasn't sure if networks and cybersecurity were included in the syllabus or not. one would see how things go initially and see if there's any room for those. Okay. I also thought that one could, rather than focusing on the syntax of each language, think more about the purpose of computing and the principles of computing in general, and get really good at doing maybe a few things really well, rather than doing several things like 5 or 6 or 7 different languages fairly superficially. Okay, so more depth, less breadth. Next slide, please. Okay, I've just mentioned about the teacher guides. All of that material I would really like to keep. There's one extra point about that. Somewhere in the mathematics, I saw a discussion of tensors. It was in relation to TensorFlow with neural networks. Now that's really, really nice, but it really belongs in physics, and it's not really the way that neural networks are implemented. I think the TensorFlow people just liked the name and they kept it. So not really necessary here. Okay, so the learning outcomes, first of all, there is progression within each module. It always goes from basic to advanced. I would actually like to take it even further and develop the data structures and algorithms from year 11 much more in depth. Once they've got some basic programming experience with JavaScript and Python, they can then have a go at doing something really useful with more complicated data structures. Okay, we can carry on to the next slide, please. All right, so in summary, too much detail for 1 year, but really good starter. Anything else? Oh yes, under recommendation, the second dot points, the applications. What is the purpose of programming in these languages? One can combine it with other subjects in the curriculum, such as math. How can one, for example, draw graphs for mathematical functions, or run simulations in physics, or simulate something like, for example, BLAST was mentioned in in biology. Yeah, okay, local alignment search tool. So they could think about how to implement that in a real code rather than just downloading software and pressing a button. Okay, the presentation throughout the curriculum, there's quite a lot of text, quite a lot of tables, lists and things like that, but not so many diagrams. So for the visual learners, the students who enjoy diagrams instead of words, more diagrams would be much more useful. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, this I think is pretty much a summary of what I'd said before, except for the last dot point. Oh yes, the second last dot point. So to develop projects and applications progressively to allow for diversity of skills. A couple of things over there to unpack. Instead of very small line by line type of assessments, which one can easily do with a browser console for JavaScript or a graphic user interface for Python, perhaps allow more time to do something more interesting that takes a few days or even a week. So a small to medium scale, maybe a small scale project that does something that is visibly useful to the students, and also allow for the fact that different students come to the subject with different levels of skill. So to allow everyone to get a moderate kind of sense of achievement out of it, maybe make it progressively refined. So you start with a small kind of project, say text classification or whatever, and the kids who have experience will rush through that and finish it quite quickly and get bored. The kids who have no experience might get stuck right in the beginning and get frustrated or panic. So maybe have progressive levels of achievement so that everyone can start at some level and end at some higher level. It's a bit like the high jump or pole vaulting in athletics. So everyone has a challenge. Okay, the next thing is about the assessments, which we will cover a bit later in the year, a bit more, but we have to take that into account now with the curriculum content already. So I'm suggesting more informal and student-driven assessments for each student to explain what they have done, why they have done things. This will force them to think rather than answering multiple choice questions, for example. Perhaps longer written presentations also forces them to organize their thinking and allow them to be challenged by other students, engage in conversation with other students, keep it really very much alive. We can worry about the formal assessments a bit later in the year. Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay.
Just before we go on, Anton, we have 2 minutes left of this session. So you've got to pick your two.
I'm pretty much,
okay,
I'm pretty much done already. So in summary, fewer languages. I would concentrate on Python and JavaScript for the reasons I've given. I would also rearrange the module 2 to come just before what is now module 6. So in other words, to come after the initial programming language basic education. So by that time, they've got a sense of what programming is and how to debug code. And they're starting to think that maybe it is important to have some kind of structure and modularity and data encapsulation that would really help. So at a later stage, they would appreciate the value of module 2 rather than it just being an academic exercise. Okay, a few small-scale real-world applications in various fields or in other subjects would be really helpful. Okay, thanks very much. I hope you find that useful.
Thank you, Anton. Now we have 1 minute before we head back to the main room. I am going to open the floor to our room first. So if you have points or something that you would like to discuss or bring up, you can do that in the main room to our friends in PNG. So I will be asking for your comments and questions first. We'll be closing the room in about 1 minute. So if everybody would just like to click the little leave room button at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Okay, well, just while we're waiting, I'm going to throw to our team in PNG. What questions do you have, or comments do you have of our 3 presentations today?
Anyone has any?
Hello. Sorry, can you hear me?
Jen, are you able to hear?
Yes.
We can hear you, yes.
Firstly, I'd like to say thank you for the report. Like we just received the report during our workshop, but we are beginning to understand some of the information that has been presented, especially in regard to the other issue that we have here. We have different groups in the room. Some are the writers themselves, the STEM curriculum writers, and some of us are not in the team, but we are being invited to participate in this review. When we look at the review, the report, it firstly, I'd like to ask if, first of all, I haven't looked at the resource materials here. I haven't seen any, especially so we have how many documents? The syllabus? Six documents. So this review is it based on the syllabus alone, or the syllabus teacher guide plus the the other documents as well?
I think it's on all of them.
On all?
Yeah, teacher guide and student research.
Oh, okay, so that means, thank you for answering that question. Now, so it simply means that these documents have been linked to some degree by some factors. And maybe from my understanding, these different documents have been linked through the curriculum standards. So that's why it's better for us, like especially me, I was wondering what kind of design that was used to develop these different resource materials, the design is so that I can better understand the report here. So it's, I'd like to know what the design that was used to develop these 4 or 6 different documents and how are they linked? What factors that link all these different documents together so that there is progression? Like from so far from now from the report, I can work out that it needs a bit of review, especially on the content mapping and alignment, to show some progression in the content outline in the different stages of the different grades. Not only apart from the content, but we also have some issues to do with assessment. But I believe it will be looked at in more detail in the other reviews later on during the year. So those are my, one of the key questions is understanding how the design used and how they have been linked, those different documents linked so that we can understand the relationship between these 4 documents. Whether are they linked using the different curriculum standards, and we already seen some from the report. We have already seen some curriculum standards such as the content standards, performance indicators, and all those. So how have they been used to link all these different documents together and the progression from one grade to the next, or the link from one document to another document, like from syllabus to teacher guide and all. So that's just my personal view on this document, and hearing from the report, reading through some of the reports here. And I believe it's through some of the comments that have been mentioned in terms of integration. There should be a review on the mapping and alignment, not only mapping and alignment, but I was also part in the grade 11. So how are these 2 linked, the 11 and 12? If we have done some big work on the grade 11, I think similar work could be done. It could be done on this grade 12 because these 2 are linked and they should show some kind of indication of progression in the content for the 2 different grades. So that is just my concern and understanding the different documents and how it has been reviewed. But seeing from the report and the recommendations, it looks like there are very good comments, information for the team to work on, especially looking at the breadth and the depth of the content in each grade. And not only looking at the breadth and the depth of the content, but the progression. How do they progress? And we also have concerns regarding the development of the content standards, the curriculum standards, the performance standards, the content standards, the performance indicators, how they have been developed. Those are some of the issues that have been raised, and I think that should be very looked at closely. Another thing that we have to look at is this is different from a normal curriculum development. We are talking about STEM, so we should be talking about some of the different approaches that we should consider in the development of STEM curriculum. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you've raised some really good points there, and that's probably a great place to start in terms of bringing everyone together and linking the whole curriculum. So not thinking of it as just a science or a biology curriculum or a technology curriculum that is standing alone or a maths curriculum that is standing alone, but linking it as a whole curriculum that actually works together.
Well, thank you, everyone. Now we get into the individual subject reviews, and it's my absolute pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Christy Osborne and Dr. Philip McKinnon. Christy has reviewed mathematics and physics, and Philip has reviewed engineering.
We understand that our presenters will have around about 5 minutes to present some key themes from each of their slides, that we don't have to cover all the themes because you've seen this material in advance, and then there's going to be some time for questions. Nicole, if that's everyone's understanding, then I'll hand over to Christy for her review of mathematics.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Dr. Christy Osborne. My background is that I'm a computational physicist. That's my research area. And then I've gone on into secondary and tertiary teaching. So that's my background. The first thing I wanted to say, if we can go to the next slide, is with the mathematics syllabus for year 12, I was just so impressed with the topics in the syllabus. I especially love the numerical methods topics, the second one, as some of the techniques talked about in there is things I've taught my own students. So it was just so lovely to see that. And the language used in the teacher resource book and the teacher guide and the student resource book was so accessible on such complicated topics. So I really think you should all be commended for writing something that's so accessible. The illustrations were fantastic. The examples were amazing as well. So in general, I just wanted to comment that the modules, they're all very much mathematics that you need to embark on an engineering and science degree in tertiary. So I think you're setting up your year 12 students really well. I especially liked how one of the content standards is to solve the problems using real life situations. So everything is contextualized. I believe that'll be very engaging for your students and also help them prepare for a STEM career. The only thing I would say in terms of recommendations was that there was a lot of content, and it was all very nice content and very much important for tertiary education. However, I am concerned that it's going to be quite difficult to get through that amount of content 8 to 9 weeks. And in particular, the examples and exercises were brilliant and they really lined up with the content well and the learning outcomes. But again, trying to cover all those exercises in the 8 to 9 weeks during class time could prove quite difficult. So I'd either recommend that some of these exercises are moved into like a homework or some of the content is reduced. Next slide, please. Yep, and next slide. So yes, I've been through topic 1, discrete mathematics, and I found that the learning outcomes was very progressive. You started off with your sets and functions and you moved on to sequences of sums and matrices. So the content made sense, it progressed through in a reasonable manner. I especially like looking through the indicators and realizing that you are getting at those higher order thinking. So in, for example, 12.11F, they're constructing their own proofs. So that's definitely a higher order thinking skill. And in 12.12G, they're applying their matrices to understand relationships between sets. So it's a great connection to sets and it's an application. So I can see those higher order thinking skills coming through in the learning outcomes. Again, the only main recommendation I would have is that there's a lot of content. I don't think it would be possible to get through that much content if, for example, you're spending 5 hours a week on mathematics. I think it would be a struggle. So some of the exercises might be better as home learning. But generally, I just want to say how wonderful it was to look through these exercises and see that they are actually related to real life situations that are going to engage students. So it was really heartening to see that. I also saw that there was quite a few links to the technology domain and the physics filer, which I thought would be very useful. And one of the recommendations I would have would be to maybe try and also connect some of these examples and exercises to the biology filer as well. Next slide, please. I especially liked reading through the logic examples and how they've been related to real life situations. Logic is often quite an abstract topic. I mean, discrete mathematics is quite an abstract topic. So being able to take these simple logic statements and relate them to real life situations that the kids can actually use and understand, I thought was very engaging. There was excellent use of in-class examples. I liked how every time a new bit of content was introduced, there would be a lovely in-class example and demonstration for the students, then you move to the next lot of content. And I could see that very strong connection to the technology domain. I was thinking as I was going through the logic in particular and some of the Boolean operations that it would be wonderful to link those to perhaps the bioelectronics, and that would help bring in some of the biotechnology theme that's currently happening in the science domains. There's a lot of examples where you need to use Boolean operations in bioelectronics, so you could actually then link to those science domains as the students are studying them. So I thought that might be a useful way to engage students further. Next slide, please. The only other suggestion I would also have is that even though the exercises are excellent ways to ensure that the students are learning what they need to be learning, I did think use of classroom discussions and peer-to-peer discussion would also be helpful during the classes. For example, you could actually get students to work in pairs on a particular exercise or problem. I was also thinking that perhaps the introduction of a research assignment into the mathematics module would be very helpful, and they could do it on a theme, like a STEM-related theme. There are ways too that the current exercises could be extended so that you could address more higher order thinking skills, especially if you ask students to justify why they've used a certain technique to solve a real life problem. So that could be a way to, they do the exercise and then you actually ask them to explain or justify why they've used that particular technique to solve that problem. For the teachers, I thought it might be useful if they could have time allocations for the exercises so they have an idea of how long the exercises would take their class. And also the range of assessments. So as you know, with mathematics, at the moment, we've all got just module tests. It's the only types of assessment we're using in mathematics. So I thought it'd be lovely if we could introduce those assignments or perhaps a short presentation where they actually construct their proof and then present that proof to the class. And next slide, please. So yes, main sum up for the mathematics modules is to reduce the amount of content if possible. This will enable students to spend more time on exercises in class. That way, if they're struggling while they're solving those exercises in class, the teacher's there and can help them straight away. Perhaps consider a research assignment along with the module tests. This will help to engage students, and it could also help link across the other disciplines that they're currently doing in science. And also consider a wide range of communication and assessment formats. And that's it for mathematics. So I do apologize if my voice sounds very hoarse. I'm recovering from a cold, so I do apologize for that. Next slide, please. So again, with the physics syllabus, I found that all the theme and modules were contemporary, innovative, and well aligned. In particular, I enjoyed how you went from your biophysics and bioelectronics, and then you started moving into the health and medicine, which had that nuclear medicine part, and then you moved straight into energy, and in particular, nuclear energy and fusion and fission. So it had a really nice flow. I did see some overlap with the artificial intelligence modules for physics and technology, which is good because it means you're learning it at the same time. But I do think it's important to note, and you probably already noted it, just to ensure that the assessment isn't the same for the physics and technology, so that there's no overlap, so the students aren't being assessed on the same thing twice. So I think that's just something to be aware of as you're doing this particular module, especially artificial intelligence, because there was quite a bit of overlap. It wasn't clear to me when I was reviewing the curriculum whether or not the bioelectronics and biophysics all was going to be covered in a 5-week period, or if it was 4 to 5 weeks for each of the two. So this review for Module 1 includes bioelectronics and biophysics. I've reviewed both, but I just wanted to be clear that I couldn't tell from the syllabus documents and the teacher resource book and the teacher guide how much time was actually allocated for the bioelectronics module and the biophysics module. Either way, again, there was a lot of content. So I would advise to have a look at that and see if it is possible to cover that much content in a 4 to 5 week period. Can we go to the next slide, please? And next one. Okay. So again, I really enjoyed reading the performance indicators. They were progressive. They clearly linked as you went along and you progressed upwards. In particular, I saw some of those higher order thinking skills, like utilize the method of N-man degradation in a practical situation, differentiate between genomics and proteomics. So these were all showing those higher order thinking skills. There is a couple of things just to check in terms of terminology. So I did have a look through the assessment tasks, and for the physics module of bioelectronics and the biotech, it appeared that there is a written quiz, a test, and an assignment. They're on different parts of the documentation. Sometimes the quiz was missing. So it's probably something just to go back and have a look at and just double check that those 3 assessments are the ones for these modules. All right, now next slide. Okay. Assuming it was 4 to 5 weeks for the biophysics and 4 to 5 weeks for the bioelectronics, so separately, you would be able to cover all the content. If it's the 4 to 5 weeks for both, I am concerned that it will be a struggle to cover the content. That being said, the content was excellent. So I really enjoyed reading the biotechnology applications to hearing aids and cancer detections and pacemakers. And I think the students will also find that relatable and engaging. And there was an excellent use of figures and tables throughout the entire documents to help illustrate the content. This was written in a really nice, simple language that was accessible to students and illustrated well. The only other recommendation I would give is that there wasn't an inclusion of local stories and examples. So perhaps one thing that could be done is to perhaps mention some of the cancer detection techniques at local hospitals and try and bring that local knowledge and context back into it. Next slide. I really enjoyed in the physics modules how there was this range of strategies used in the classroom. So the teacher resource book and the teacher guide clearly show that there were spots there for classroom discussions, there were laboratory practicals, there were research assignments, along with the written test. So there was a fantastic example of using a diverse range of teaching strategies and a diverse range of assessment strategies. The activities themselves were engaging and they were problem-based. Many of them have the potential to enable deeper learning by just having some slight tweaks. So if you take a look back at the assignment for module 12.2, one way to ensure that you are assessing higher order thinking in that assignment would be to ask students to evaluate advantages and disadvantages of particular devices. And that would bring in that higher order thinking. Again, like in the mathematics module, it would be helpful for teachers if there were time allocations given to assignments and an indication in these guides whether or not these assignments would be done in class, using classroom resources, or whether or not they'd be done at home. Next slide, please. So the general summary for the physics module is that the amount of content is likely to be too much to cover in that period, or if it is covered, it won't leave as much time for deep learning. There's very simple ways to extend some of the current activities to higher order thinking. There's simple examples where you can incorporate more local context and stories. However, overall, there was such a large range of teaching strategies and assessment strategies that I felt that this module is really going to be able to do those higher order thinking skills and also enable students to display their STEM skills in a variety of formats, much like a STEM professional would. So that was the end of the physics module.
And over to you, Phil.
Yeah, thanks very much, Michelle. If we could have the next slide. It's a great pleasure to be able to talk to you, and I have enjoyed very much reading the various documents and found it quite fascinating. In terms of the overall feedback on the syllabus, firstly, it does a great job of covering all of the engineering disciplines, and it's done using by topic, which makes absolute sense given the problem-based approach to it. The only thing I would suggest with that, though, is that there be some sort of explicit mapping of those topics to the engineering disciplines. I'm guessing that one of the reasons for this subject, amongst others, would be to give your students a feeling for engineering, the engineering disciplines, for some who might want to go on to university and study engineering further. So tertiary engineering is run by discipline. So having a clear linkage of the various professions would be helpful in that respect. There is a variation, I saw some variation in the depth of the various thema. For example, the first one, the biotechnology one, as compared to some of the later ones, such as robotics and AI, where there could potentially be a lot more challenge and depth in some of those. So I'd recommend that you look carefully at the level of depth that each of those thema go into. As with maths and physics, I'd strongly recommend there's a lot to cover. It's very challenging. I would consider reducing the overall curriculum content and maybe going in a little bit more depth in some aspects. Next slide, please, Michelle. Next one. So looking at the learning outcomes, there is a real effort I see in there that the progression is from understanding into more application. That's very, very obvious with the biotechnology module. And there is, I also see an effort to build use it with the performance indicators on the challenge and the depth that is addressed. As Michelle mentioned in the main session, the performance indicators need to be written as a clear action, and I'll come back to that. There are also a lot of performance indicators, and I think that gets back to the amount of content that is in the curriculum. So perhaps considering how much you're covering and reducing perhaps some of the ambition in that coverage might actually help with that. The other thing I'd note so far as agricultural biotechnology is concerned, I'd be very careful with the term, because agricultural biotechnology is generally taken as the application of gene technology to improve crops. For example, putting glyphosate resistance into crops so that you can spray them with a weedicide. I think perhaps a better title might be the application of engineering in agriculture, because it does cover a lot of the different engineering disciplines as applied in agriculture. Let's go on to the next slide, please. In terms of the content, I'm now looking at the first one, which is the agricultural biotechnology, so the module there. I enjoyed reading the student resource book, but there at the moment, the teacher resource book looks very similar to the student resource book, so it'll be good to see some additional resources put in for the teachers. There are a lot of topics in it, the 4 topics, which do cover quite a lot. They move from a case study through to more and more applied and local context. So I particularly liked topic 3 and 4, which relate directly to New Guinea. I wasn't clear why Krasnakat Kray was there as a case study. That it may well be justified, but the rationale for selecting it and how it fits with the later topics would be useful. You might consider as a possibility that you could reduce the number of topics there and take topic 4 as the ultimate goal of what you're trying to do, which is around the designing the Markham Valley for agriculture, and take that as the context in which you address some of those other earlier topics. For example, what agricultural machinery are required for that particular one. So you use the ultimate goal of developing agriculture in the Markham Valley as the driver for the earlier topics. It might also mean that you put in a more diversity of case studies for different types of agriculture. Move on to the next one, please. I'd like to see more on the assessment. There you have what I call a fairly traditional type of assessment, but I'd like to see it linked better to the performance indicators. That helps students, helps teachers, and it also will help you with reasoning as to what kind of assessment you're going to use. The practical and case study could potentially align with a problem-based approach. There's also the opportunity, I think, to use formal oral presentations and teamwork with the sorts of activities that you're doing. I'll move on to the last slide. Yes, we put them all up, thanks. So just to review the engineering, it would be good to see a rationale for the topic choice. Why is that topic included? How does that fit with the theme? I'd recommend reducing the breadth, the number of topics, and going into some more depth. Ensure that the performance indicators are a measurable action. So as Michelle has mentioned in the main session, that the verb needs to be something you can say yes or no, whether the student has actually achieved it or not. And it would be good to see the assessment aligned with the performance indicators so we can see what the purpose is, what the assessment is measuring. And ensure that there is consistency across the thema and modules. There is also, as Christy mentioned, with the physics curriculum, there is a potential for working with some of the other areas. For example, AI and robotics there could be integration with the technology curriculum. And with the agricultural and medical biotechnology, which are also part of the curriculum, the biology curriculum could also overlap with that. But that's it for engineering.
Thank you very much, Christy and Philip. I really enjoyed those reviews. Aaron, I'm wondering whether I hand over to you now to facilitate the questioning. You certainly would know the folk, your colleagues in the room there that would have questions for Christy or Phil. So can I hand over to you to identify who has arrived with a question or who, for whom a question's emerged now in the context of the workshop?
Sure thing. So I'll open it to everyone in the room here. Was there any questions that came up as part of the presentation just now, or any comments that people had that wanted to add anything? So we've got a mix of maths, engineering and physics. We've got all three domains represented here, which is great. I think in the other room we might be missing a chemistry person. I'm not 100% sure, but mostly the domains are here. And it came up from the curriculum writers that you wanted further clarification on. Any comments? What about from NGOE or Dr. Klein?
I think generally the comments are fair, and I think they're probably very good, very valid. We were also struggling with some of the things that are being highlighted here. So, and I think the interest of timing, how we have to make the timelines to make sure that these things were delivered. So, so those comments are really valid, and I just appreciate them. Just one point about the cross note I cry. We're just trying to figure out how we do the. We're thinking about the hub and spokes model for agricultural settlements and things like that we could replicate in Markham, because you got to relocate people and then plot that up. So anyway, so we're looking around the world and just looking at Google and trying to find out where this sort of things happen, and that's where we found it. So we found something up in China as well, but it was a little bit more too intensive for the students. So we thought that would be a sort of an introduction to it. But again, thank you. That we need to just explain the rationale for that choice. Otherwise, like, why cross, not like why, you know?
Yeah.
So
on that point, you could be driven by the problem that you have to choose maybe some smaller case studies. For example, if irrigation was something that you wanted to look at, then the Middle East, Israel, Australia even.
Yeah, we'll look at the Israeli case. We look at those settlements and see how it works. But we settle on it because it's a bit more easier to explain in terms of the transportation corridors that has to be integrated together with the resettlements and all of those things, and that's why we found that. But anyway, but the points that you've raised, especially for physics and math, I think I like all the comments. Again, and the comments on the contents are very, very valid, because we went overboard with the contents in the TRBs just to make sure that the teachers have at least as much information as they can when they're operating out there in the schools, where there's limitations on access to information and access to online sources or resources. So that's why we spend a lot of time. We started from TRBs just trying to work our way through. And I think on the physics, you're quite right. I think on the bioelectronics, I think we changed that particular one. And we had problems with two writers for the physics. So we had to go through 3 different writers for physics, and we still haven't got the physics writer yet. So, but that particular one on this is we are working on that to change that particular theme. So we'll probably get, and I think we've chosen something else, but I can't remember now. But otherwise, excellent comments. I really appreciate them.
Fantastic. Any other questions?
Thank you, Ron. Thank you for those wonderful reviews. I understand the content is too large, and the teachers felt it in the classroom as well. So we went over from 5 hours to 6 hours in a day. So there are extra periods for a certain number of subjects, so they could cover them. And we'll see we can align it. The bridging course for last year, that after your review has been moderated. So it's okay for this year. I like the engineering part of review, because all other subjects we have been teaching them in PNG schools, and we were, I think Dr.'s team started developing and putting things around, but engineering is the first time to bring them into secondary school level. We never had an engineering subject in the past. So this is the first time. So thank you for all those wonderful comments. Hopefully we'll take it on board and slowly develop it from there. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions or comments from the team? No? Gibson? Yes, please go.
Thank you for the valid feedbacks. Oh, I haven't received the documents. Most importantly, thank you for the reminders on how to develop this curriculum, basically with respect to STEM, to be more authenticity and having enough content for the timing, and promoting deeper understanding. Those are the key areas, so that how we can integrate them in actual teaching and learning in the classroom. So thank you for those comments, which I think the team will consider that also. And also in the content that most comments on the feedback described on the content. So I think we'll have to realign and make realign scope and sequence of the content, so that there is no distortion or overlapping of contents as the development takes place. I think we have to make a realignment of content and scope and sequencing, so that will ensure that content flows smoothly across and integrated. Thank you.
I don't want more to going back to one more things mentioned about the weighting of each of the assessments. That's a big issue for us, and we went with all our teachers, and we are also working on our own assessment policy for all the STEM curriculum, and hopefully we will fit in different assessment weighting. And we take note of some of the suggestions you gave, what to give for more practical and assignments, work-related things. Thank you.
And I think just to add to that, Benny, and Michelle pointed this out earlier on, is that one of the next mechanisms of support that we've got ACER engaged to help with is formative and summative assessment. So they'll be there to help with that as well and provide some feedback along the way. I think, I can't remember the date, but it's later in the year.
That's right, Aaron. It's deliverable 3 is formative and summative. We move to grade 11 curriculum next, and it's really good to hear that you've already had opportunity to modify the bridging curriculum. I'm wondering, Aaron, could I ask a question? Yeah. Have you also modified term 2, grade 11 in response to feedback?
I can forward that to bridging curriculum, the modified version to you, so you can have a look at it. The teachers, all of them came back with the team, the curriculum writers team and the teachers who are teaching came together. We were able to work out. So we also had some other issues like capacity because some of the teachers are very new. We brought in fresh engineers and some of them are trying to understand the pedagogy and the kids' psychology. So that was another issue. So we are trying to put them all together. So we have very few trained engineers who've been teaching in the schools, but there are about 10 or 11 engineers recently been recruited and they have been teaching since last year. So we are putting them to teacher training during the Christmas break time. So they're going through that postgraduate diploma in teaching. Yes. So hopefully they were able to adapt it and come up with some idea.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Ipan, but the plan is, so what happened with the year 11 curriculum is the feedback that was provided from ACER helped inform the year 12 writing, and NDOE hasn't had the capacity yet to go back and address all of the changes in year 11 other than the bridging term 1 exercise, but they're hoping to go back and look at term 2, 3 and 4 in the coming period to reflect on that. And we're also having conversations with the Australian High Commission about what additional support might be available to help them with making those changes. Because I think Princeton, you're the only one that's in the STEM unit, or with the STEM, you're the STEM person, key STEM person at the department at the moment.
The curriculum division did not get handed into the STEM, though I gave all the syllabus for the assistant secretary got it. We didn't have a STEM person. Yeah. And he's the only one put on for STEM training right now.
There's only one person in the department for the whole secondary sector.
Yeah, I appreciate the sort of constraints, Aaron. I've worked in many international contexts. Thank you, though, for that confirmation that the bridging course has been modified. We appreciate that you're yet to get to term 2. And I agree, when you're talking about teacher professional learning, that will be very important to support implementation of a new curriculum, not only in terms of the substantive content focus, but the pedagogical approaches most importantly. And finally, that was news to hear that that's the first time you're going to introduce engineering into a senior curriculum. Philip, I don't know whether you picked that up in any of the materials, or I wasn't aware of that, so well done.
I think I heard it last year.
Okay.
It's congratulations. It's engineering is when you talk about engineering, it's huge. There's so many different disciplines, so to get something, to distill something down as far as you have is a pretty good effort, and just need to go a little bit further, I think, rather than trying to cover everything, just go down a bit more depth on some key areas.
And just one question there. You made a comment about engineering being developed around topics for our curriculum versus along disciplines as traditionally done elsewhere. So will you clarify a little bit on that for us?
Sure. Yeah.
The writing is around thematic areas, so it's a little difficult to sort of wander around or away from topics to a discipline.
Yeah. Engineering is by nature applied, so it's around solving problems. But those problems are solved through the different disciplines. I like the approach that you're taking with the different topics. That's very good. All I was suggesting was for your students that they understand how the different disciplines contribute to those different topics and solving the problems that you set from those different topics. The reason for that is, from year 12, if they're going to go and study engineering at university, they'll need to identify a particular kind of discipline. Of course, they'll get exposure at university as well. Usually it's not immediate that you choose your discipline, but having some sense of how the different, like electrical engineering as opposed to biomedical engineering, just how those different professions contribute to solving those problems. I'm sure you say you've got teachers, that you've got engineers that you're teaching to be teachers, they'll have a good handle for that.
And just, I think, to add one other contextual update for ACER colleagues here, which you may or may not be aware of. The STEM curriculum is currently only being rolled out in the 6 National Schools of Excellence, used to be called the National High Schools. And I know there's an aspiration at some point to roll that out beyond those 6 schools in the coming probably 2 to 3 years. The work that the PNGAus Partnership Secondary Schools program is doing is obviously with you guys, with ACER, in supporting that curriculum refinement. We've got a separate stream of support around teacher professional learning and skills development. And so we're in the process of engaging QUT, Queensland University of Technology. They were the ones that ran the course that Miriam mentioned around the graduate certificate in STEM education. And so they're working with us to, I guess you could say, cut it up a bit, because it is a 6-month course and we don't have time to deliver that to all the teachers in that depth, but to cut it up and to align aspects of it around the pedagogical practice, assessment, etc., to be delivered to our 12 schools that we're working with over the next 8 to 10 months over the school holiday period. So there's a process that's underway at the moment where every school holidays between now and January will have sort of a 5-day workshop working with key STEM teachers in each of the schools, and referring back to the STEM curriculum that's been developed to make sure that they're competent and confident enough to be able to deliver it in their schools. And that'll apply to the non-national high schools as well. So we want to prepare them so that when it does roll out, we've got those schools in those provinces as leaders or champions that can help continue to promote STEM education in PNG.
Thank you, Aaron. I really appreciate that additional context, and so glad to hear that you've got that strategy in place around professional learning for teachers. Nicole, my sense is that we have to go back to the main room now.
Yes.
Is that right? Thank you.
So now that room 2 is back, Michelle, we've just been having a few discussions from our room. I was wondering if you just wanted to summarise or have a bit of a reflection of what happened in your room, and we will do the same, and then we can open the floor to others.
Sure, Jen. We had some nice summaries from the participants, the PNG stakeholders. I'm wondering if I hand over to them and they could provide a summary. What I learnt was that already there has been opportunity to revisit Term 1, the bridging course, in response to ACER feedback. So that was wonderful to hear, because grade 11 will be our next focus for deliverable 2. I also learned that engineering is being offered for the first time in the senior curriculum. That is really commendable, I think, to have that kind of really careers focused shift into STEM there. And Aaron indicated the kind of depth of teacher professional learning that is also underway in your partnership with QUT. So that has kind of given me, having not engaged last year in this project, a much broader perspective. But could we just use our couple of minutes to hand back to Aaron and the team there for a summary?
Please.
Okay, I think Mr. Ripen can say something. The comments that we received here for physics, math, and engineering were quite really good comments and good reviews. So I'm glad that we have this session, so we can incorporate some of these comments into reflected in the syllabus itself or in the curriculum itself. So that's really good. The other thing that obviously came out is that there was just too much content. And I think that's what we set out to do. We wanted to give too much to the teachers so that there's enough information. Most cases, the teachers are not online, so the resource materials that they need to teach the students are not there readily available. So that's what we set out to do. So it's a fair criticism. We wanted it, so it's great. And it was deliberate to make sure it was heavy on content, both for the TRBs, the Teachers Resource Book, and then for the Student Resource Book, for the same reason, we almost made it almost alike, similar, but I think, except that the answers to the questions were taken out from the Student Resource Book. So those were deliberate. So I'm glad that you made this comment. So we'll ever look at this, discuss with the Education Department and see how we can support the resource for the teachers. That is the underlying motivation to make sure it was heavy in the content side. But I'm glad, and again, we have moderated the term 1. So it's not almost like climbing Mount William or the Mount Everest. It's just going to be a little more hill for the students and the teachers as an introduction to STEM in term 1. We're working on and making sure that there's some things that we took out. We had problems with the physics in the grade 12, so we just need to manage that aspect of it, especially the writers, the 3 writers we went through. We had to let them go. So we're just now working on trying to make sure that we write, and then 1 or 2 things have been taken out of that. So that's, I think that's about it. But generally the comments are fair and very, very good. It's helping us, I think, in the next phase. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, room 1, Junior, is there someone in that room who would like to summarize the kind of overarching presentations that we had and what they found most useful?
Thanks for the wonderful feedback and comments made for biology and chemistry, technology. I'll just take one minute to comment on give my feedback on biology, and this will on chemistry and technology. My name is Sola, and thanks Dr. McNeely for the comment, feedback. So we'll take on board what I said and review the syllabus, the grade 1 syllabus on the major aspects such as sequencing of the modules for biotechnology, health and medicine, artificial intelligence, and robotics. I'll review with my team, and we'll consider the sequencing of the modules again. Just to recap on last biotech and health and medicine, from the last grade 11, term 2 biotechnology and health and medicine. In that case, it was just a progressive progress of what they've learned from there. So we can, for the DNA extraction bit and extraction, amplification, and sequencing bit, for grade 12, they might do sequencing and analysis for the bioinformatics part of it. And I think extraction and amplification might be done in grade 11. That's for just messaging of the modules themselves, topics. Yeah, I think that's all for the content for the syllabus and syllabus outline.
Yeah, thank you. Great summary. Just a huge thank you to our ACER reviewers for being here today, our curriculum writers for having such a great conversation. Our next steps are we will be coming back together in March or April to look at the rest of the year 11 curriculum, and then later in the year, in the middle of the year in June or July, to look at the assessment before tying it all up in September. So we will be meeting again, and we can continue these discussions then. But in the meantime, if you'd like to contact anybody or have a chat, please reach out to the AEF or AAPNG team, and we can put you in touch with the team at ACER. So in closing our session, I would like to invite Mr. Benny Rayapan, the Director of Secondary Education Management and Coordination at the National Department of Education in PNG, to give the closing address.
So if you have any questions that's pending and you don't have an opportunity here, you can always flag it with us, and we'll connect you with the responsible subject reviewers, so you can directly flag the questions with them or comment with them, so they can, provide a good response to your comments or your questions, so that will help to guide you in your review as well. Yeah, but I think they will share the full report of the review with your team, so you can get a chance to look into the entire report, and then you can raise some questions if you would like. By email is good, or you can connect via Zoom and talk to the responsible subject reviewers. They're here to support us, so you can take this opportunity. Yes.
This is true. Mr. Rayapan is back, so we're ready when you are ready.
Okay.
Martha is back as well.
Right. I'll hand over to Mr. Rayapan, and I'll just zoom in so we can see him.
Everyone from Australia and in PNG and the other room as well. On behalf of the Department of Education and Secretary for Education, I would like to sincerely thank you for your wonderful feedback and your support. And Australia Awards has done a great job in bringing us together. About a few years ago, it was a dream for us, and now it's getting into reality. Since last, the curriculum, STEM curriculum was an issue for us, and when we started with Dr. Clement Vaine and his team of 32 writers in the country, and we slowly started with last year and this year, and it's now complete. Last year's review, I want to go back, and apart from the bridging curriculum, we took note of some things that you mentioned to us, particularly the verb pattern of inquiry-based learning and problem-based learning. And we put it to our teachers. So those teachers whom we trained in during workshops, so they took note of all those reviews that you gave it to us. So they are implementing them into the classrooms. Last year we started with around 300 students, but some students dropped along the way. There are about 280 students on board with us who are going to do grade 12 curriculum this year and will be examined, and they will be given a certificate and they will move on. This year, 2022, we have about 500 plus students taking STEM curriculum. And therefore, we will definitely take note of all your feedback. And next week, we are having a workshop with our teachers. And all the STEM teachers will come around to Port Moresby, and we were able to say all these feedback to them. And we will find out, work with Dr. Vaine and the team, whether we can change those areas of requirement where and when it's needed. And the assessment part, other things, our teachers will take care of them. And thank you very much for your wonderful feedback, and looking forward to work with you closely in all the things that we needed. Apart from engineering, there are other areas, the ICT, information and communication technology is also improved a lot. Before we were basically offering the computer courses. Now the technology got built into that as well. So thank you very much for all the feedback, and thank you to the team. Thank you, Arun, for facilitating and bringing us together. And I'll take back all these and we will inform our implementers, our teachers on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that concludes our session. So we'll see you again for the next session in April.